Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and welcome to a new series where we are going to be investigators. We are going to be looking in the series, inshallah, at how we can be our very own CSI. And so in the series, we're welcoming you all to investigate with us the comparative sciences of Allah, the comparative sciences of Dawah, and how we can bring people, inshallah, with the information that we learn and the information that we gather in the series to Allah, to bring them to understand how we as Muslims see and believe and live this religion of Islam based on the concept of Ilallah. And so we're not going to look too much at other areas. We're not going to look at fasting, we're not going to look at Hajj and all these other issues, which we can perhaps do in future series. But in this series, we are going to channel ourselves. We are going to restrict ourselves to looking at one concept. So inshallah, it's going to be a long adventure. It's going to be a long series, but inshallah, it will have good benefits for you. So what can you expect in this series of CSI? What you can expect to write for your life. There are going to be lots of notes that you are going to need to take, and those who are joining us from home, get yourself a nice little notebook, perhaps something similar to this one, a decent quality pen or pencil, a highlighter, so that you can take notes throughout the series. We're going to show you how to take notes in this series, inshallah. We're also going to show you how to listen as well, inshallah. But today we're going to be getting into our main topic. And later in the series, we'll be dealing with issues, dealing with how to take notes and how to listen when you are at a lecture. So it's going to be practical, it's going to be down to earth, it's going to be dealing with real issues. But it's also, inshallah, going to empower you to be effective da'is in your community. That's what we want to be after all. If we are Muslims, we want to be effective in whatever we do. And today we have a number of courses on Dawah. If you go on the internet and you had to type in Dawah, you will see every day somewhere in the world there is a Dawah course that is being offered. There are people offering Dawah courses that are expensive, and you have Dawah courses that are free. And all the Dawah courses are important to attend if you have the means and the opportunity to attend them. Islam is not just one-dimensional or two-dimensional. It is many-dimensional. But if we look at it like a diamond, no matter how you look at it, it's the same diamond, but there are many facets to it, many ways that light catches it, many prisms that come through it when the light catches it in a specific way. And the same thing applies to Dawah. There are many types of Dawah. Some of them are more stronger than others. Some of them are following more what the Quran and the Sunnah is saying than others. But you can learn from all of those, even those that are not very strongly based. You can eat the chicken and spit out the bones. When you eat a chicken, you don't eat the bones. You just take the flesh off the chicken and eat that. You don't eat the bones as well. So even if you go to a series and you find it, maybe you paid for 2 days at the series, and you find after the first day this is not working for you, at least the first day you've managed to get a bit of chicken, and something from that series should have helped you. So I'm not saying that this is the beginning and end all of all Dawah series that you'll ever come across in your life. But it has looked at investigating what we should do. I have tried to look at what is the most balanced. And there are many series. There's Dawah Power. Some of you might have seen those adverts for Dawah Power. It doesn't belong to any group. It's just somebody who came up with an advert. Some people say, get addicted to Dawah. Some people say how to get a Shahada in 2 minutes or 5 minutes or half an hour or a week. There's all these courses that are available. We're not going to be dealing with that. In fact, we're not going to be even looking at technique in this series, inshallah. What we are going to look at is what is permissible and what is not permissible in Dawah. Not all forms of Dawah are acceptable. Might surprise you to hear this. In Islam, we do not believe that the end justifies the means. Some religions in the world believe that you can do anything as long as the end result is that the person converts. And that is totally false, not acceptable, not part of our deen. If it was part of our deen, people would be opening up brothels and they'd have a TV playing in the background with Dawah lectures, and that would be full with people. But it's not permissible to do that. We are bound by the rules of Allah. We are bound by the Sharia. We are bound by the rules that we find in Islam that are not breakable, not adaptable, not changeable. They are rules that protect us from ourselves, and they are rules that protect us from others as well. But first and foremost, the rules that we find in Islam protect ourselves, then they protect others. So this is some of the information that we're going to be looking at this series. So we encourage you to invite new Muslims, people who perhaps are battling in their Islam. They've reverted to Islam, but they have so many questions that keep coming up. Some brothers and sisters who revert to Islam find it very, very difficult. There's so much that they have to learn. And sometimes it's the da'i who's at fault because he overburdens the person. And maybe he even scares the new revert away, or scares them into thinking that they're too scared to ask questions in case people see that they're not strong or that they are weak in certain issues. So instead of speaking up, they remain silent. And perhaps you're one of those reverts who remain silent for even 10 years or 20 years and been afraid to ask questions. We will, inshallah, in this series also be dealing with those issues as well. So it incorporates a lot of information in a short series. So we encourage you to listen in, invite your friends, make sure that you take notes throughout the series. We're going to be referring in the first few episodes in the series to a book written on the topic of Dawah Ilallah. And it will be done in the following format. There is a brother, his name is Brother Ashi, who will be with us in the series, inshallah, and he will be reading from the book in the way that you often see it done in a number of the classes that you may have attended in other parts of the world, where you would have somebody who would read from the book, and then the person who is teaching would comment on it and expand upon it. So this is the format that we're going to follow in dealing with the first few episodes. After that, it'll just be me speaking. So it'll give you an opportunity to have a change so you don't get bored with my voice and my technique and my style. And so you'll have somebody else's voice and somebody else's face to look at as well during the series, inshallah. Also, the members of our wonderful panel here, or our audience here today, are going to be able to ask questions. What I would prefer to do is wait until the end of the section. I will ask you, do you have any questions? If you have questions, then you would ask during that time, so that I don't lose trail of thought where I'm going. So sometimes when you ask a question in the middle of a thought, unless it's a discussion, we prefer to wait until the end. So let's go straight ahead and move into today's program, inshallah. So this is taken from the works of a doctor. His name is Saeed Ahmed, and he has written this work, and his work is entitled Dawah Ilallah. And so we're going to begin with the opening of a reading from the Quran, chapter 42. And brother, would you like to read us the introduction to the series?
In the Quran, in chapter 42, verse 14 and 15, as translated in English, and divided not till after knowledge had come to them through selfish transgression between themselves. And had it not been for a word that went forth before from your Lord for an appointed term, the matter would have been settled between them. And verily, those who are made to inherit the scripture, that is the Torah and the gospel, after them, that is the Jews and the Christians, are in grave doubt concerning it. That is Allah's true religion, Islam, or the Quran.
Now, we can see in this opening of this book that this brother has written that he is quoting how the state of the world at the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was already in great error. People were already confused. You know how confused the world is today? Can you imagine that at that early stage? I mean, Christianity was probably about 400 years old, if that. Most of us, if we actually look at the history of Christianity, we'll see that Christianity was probably only about 100 years old as an organized, structured religion by that time. Before that, it was splintered groups. There were lots of hundreds, perhaps even thousands of splinter groups that were still associating themselves with forms of Judaism. They were still connected to Judaism. It hasn't separated itself. The Council of Nicaea, which is another series for another time, which a panel of Christians brought Christianity under an umbrella. So it was only in existence for about 100 years before the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had been born. So we're looking at maybe 150 years before this comes into existence. Well, before we go on with that, let us take a short break. When we get back from the break, we'll continue, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back. We are continuing with our series at the look at Dawah Ilallah and this book that was written, or this text that we are looking at today, inshallah. Before the break, we were reading from the Quran, or the translation, in chapter 42 from verse 14, or we looked at verse 14 and 15, and how it speaks about the confusion and the state of affairs that took place in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And how Allah is saying to the people of our era and to the people of that era, look at the state that the world had got into. How quickly they had gone into error. How quickly they had turned away from the message that their prophets had brought. And he addresses this message to the Jews and to the Christians. So this is where we got to. So now we're going to continue, brother. You can continue from where we left off in the second part.
So on to this religion of Islam and this Quran, then invite and stand firm as you are commanded, and follow not their desires, but say, I believe in whatsoever Allah has sent down of the book, and I'm commanded to do justice among you. Allah is our Lord and your Lord. For us is our deeds, and for you your deeds. There is no dispute between us and you. Allah will assemble us, and to Him is the final return.
It is important that when we do dawah, that we actually read this before we go out and do dawah. Read this chapter every single time. Perhaps you want to speak to somebody. This is the formula that we're going to follow through this series, inshallah, that we find here. It's no use us coming up with our own ideas and our own thoughts on how to do dawah. Many times we find that when a dawah session is going to be prepared, perhaps you're going to do street dawah. Perhaps the Olympics is coming to your city. Perhaps the Soccer World Cup is coming to your city, or the cricket. And so you get a dawah committee together and you have a brainstorming session. I'm sure you've heard this and you've seen this. People write down, so what should we do? And they start writing down brainstorming sessions. You don't need a brainstorming session because it has already been done. It has already been given to you. We have to follow a formula that is acceptable to Allah. So you can have ideas, but they need to be based on what is acceptable. And so we find in this text, there is an acceptable formula given to us. That we don't have to come up with clever ideas of our own. We have to see what is acceptable, what is permissible. And we see that in this writing that we have read, in the text that we've heard narrated, and the translation that is given to us in the English from the Quran, it gives us certain formulas that we need to follow. And inshallah, this is what we'll be going through. And it speaks very, very clearly, before we continue what the author says, is that we must not dispute. Today, this is very, very difficult to do. We find that Islam is under attack. It's under attack from within Islam, and it's under attack from outside of Islam. It is said that the greatest opposition to dawah does not come from non-Muslims. That actually comes from Muslims. And this is a sad state of affairs, where we find that opposition to the growth of Islam sometimes takes place from within and not from without. In my country, in South Africa, the Jews have no problem with me going outside their synagogues and talking to people. The Christians have no problem with me propagating Islam in the community or the streets where I am. But we'll find that there are certain groups within Islam, certain Muslims, that perhaps have a different understanding of what Islam actually is, that will have a problem with you doing dawah. So be prepared that when you go out and do dawah, the opposition may not come from where you expect it to come from. But then we have to understand that if it's based on what Allah has told us, then we won't have to worry about what any opposition tells us. People are often afraid. They say, well, I was invited to go to Pakistan, or I was invited to go to India, or I was invited to go to China, or wherever it is, but I'm afraid for my safety. And we will deal with that in this series. We must be bold. If we know truth is on our side, we must be bold. And this is one of the beautiful things about Islam, is that it's a common sense religion. You can take a child and sit him down before someone else has started to put nonsense in his head when he's 4 years old or 3 years old or 5 years old and say, explain to me a concept, whatever it is, an Islamic concept. He'll get it. He'll explain it to you almost verbatim for what you would find that we understand as Muslims. He would understand that. Take a Christian child and ask him to explain and see how confused he will get when you try to do that same experiment with him. Or perhaps take an atheist child or an agnostic child. He's very confused because it's not common sense. It requires supernatural understanding, or it requires him dumbing himself down, or it requires him being blind to the facts that are at hand. So Islam is a common sense religion because it makes sense that we all have. It's common to all of us. You'll find many, many people, you ask them, why did you revert to Islam? And they said, but I've been living like a Muslim for 4 or 5 years before I became a Muslim. Somebody came along and then told me about Islam, and I go, identify with that. That's what I was already doing. So this is why we say it is a common sense religion. Now, brother, you can continue reading the next passage.
First of all, some reasons have been provided which necessitate the work of da'wah. Then some of the points have been mentioned to which one has to invite. And lastly, the caller has been advised to have some characteristics.
Okay, so what we see in this text so far is that there is a necessity to do the work of dawah. We're required to do dawah. There is an importance in calling people to Allah. Remember, the dawah we're doing is specific. The dawah that we are talking about is Dawah Ilallah. What is dawah? Dawah is inviting. I'm not going to go through the basic, we should all know this. It means to call, it means to invite, it means to, in the term of understanding Islam, sometimes we think of it as preaching. In fact, if you go to Google and you type in dawah, Wikipedia or all that, they say preaching. It's not preaching. Preaching has the connotation of speaking down to. Preaching as I'm more superior than you and you need to listen to me because I'm the preacher. This is not dawah. Dawah is inviting, talking, reasoning, calling. It has many of these things. So if we just say dawah by itself, we could be inviting people to buy a new mobile phone. We could be inviting people to buy a hamburger. It means very little when it's in isolation by itself, unless you're a Muslim. And even sometimes if you're a Muslim, maybe you don't understand the full meaning of the word if it just sits on its own, dawah. Call to what? Some people are calling to all sorts of strange things in their dawah as Muslims. Some people are calling to things that are leading people away from the truth in Islam and thinking that it's a good form of dawah. There is a correct formula that has to be followed. First of all, we need to call to Dawah Ilallah. Once that has been established, and trust me, that will take a very long time, then we can move on to the other forms within dawah. Sometimes when we attend dawah training, it can often be very confusing because we're trying to deal with fasting and hajj and praying 5 times a day and prophethood and angels and destiny, and that will take you years. That can take you lifetimes to accomplish. So we need to be specific in the opportunities that we have to bring it to one point. You have 2 minutes, 30 seconds to talk to somebody. What are you going to talk to them about? Fasting? Hajj? These things are important, but they are not the things that we're going to use with limited time that's given to us. And don't just think that it's something that is going to be easy to explain. If I had to ask a question and I had to say, where is Allah? The scary thing is that perhaps, so even though that you have been a Muslim your entire life, that you were a born Muslim, many people will answer that question incorrectly. So even our understanding of what we should know, who Allah is misunderstood much of the time. So don't think that it's an easy concept to tell somebody. When you talk to a Christian and you say to him that we are calling you to Allah, he has a version of what God is that is very, very difficult to dismantle. It can take you years. When a person who has been a drug addict stops and decides that day that he's no longer going to be a drug addict, he doesn't get cured in the first day. Perhaps he's not even cured in the first 10 years. He has huge problems. The alcoholic has huge problems. The person who's recovering from pornography addiction has huge problems. It's not resolved in a day or a year or perhaps even 10 years. And this is what I like about Alcoholics Anonymous. They call themselves alcoholics even if they've been dry and haven't touched alcohol for 50 years. They still call themselves an alcoholic because they still have the potential to take a drink again. When a person is invited to Dawah Ilallah, they still are addicted to their previous beliefs. It's still inside them. This is why it took the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ so long to get the concept of the oneness of Allah into the minds of the people, because they still had the addictions. They still had the cravings. They still got the shakes when it became that time of year that they were used to worshipping idols. So Dawah Ilallah is a huge responsibility. It is a huge task. And it's not something that is easy to do. This is why when we often see Dawah courses, they mention it, but it is a passing thought, because it is very difficult to teach. So we're going to be teaching that, inshallah, in this series, because it's one of the most important aspects. Because if you get this right, inshallah, if Allah allows the person to have the ability to grasp the rest will all fall into place easily. Before we finish for today's program, there was a young man in South Africa who was in a metal band. He played in a rock band, metal, heavy metal. And he wanted to become a Muslim, and I gave him Dawah, and I gave him Dawah Ilallah. Eventually he became a Muslim, and he said, but I'm not going to give up music. And I said to him, it doesn't matter, don't give up music. Just trust in Allah. 6 months later, he decided on his own, because Allah guides whom He wills, that he no longer wants to play music. He is now 5th year in his studies at a university where he's studying Islamic studies. So you see, if you give people Dawah Ilallah, Allah does the rest. And if the Dawah is done correctly in the beginning, you don't have to say to them, you must stop this, you must stop that, and you must stop the other. It will change because the Dawah was done properly in the beginning. Dawah Ilallah was done properly. Well, that's all the time we have for today's episode. So if you tune in again next time, we'll continue with this series, inshallah. So for me, Areeb Islam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
مشفق متعطف لا ينتهي بالحصر ما